The most significant pre-Columbian discovery of the last century began on an abandoned cattle ranch purchased by a broke photography student for less than the price of a smartphone, all triggered by one young woman's desperate search for affordable housing, a decision that would bring world-renowned archaeologists to her property at dawn and eventually rewrite our understanding of ancient Native American civilization in the Southwest. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The dusty gravel driveway crunched under Mia Reyes' worn pickup truck as she pulled up to the dilapidated ranch house. At 24, the photography student had developed a knack for finding unusual opportunities out of necessity rather than choice. 6 months after her scholarship funding was unexpectedly cut due to budget constraints, her meager income from freelance photography and part-time barista work had left her living out of her truck, showering at the university gym, and desperately searching for affordable housing in the increasingly expensive area around Santa Fe, New Mexico. The property, located in the remote outskirts of Cimarron County, had been listed in an online tax auction with a minimum bid of $500 for the land and decrepit structures. The listing had warned of extensive damage, no utilities, and potential environmental hazards. Phrases Mia now understood translated to completely uninhabitable and abandoned for decades. But with only $740 in her bank account and the summer heat making life in her truck unbearable, even an abandoned ranch seemed like an opportunity. Well, it's definitely rustic, Mia muttered to herself as she surveyed the weathered wooden structure. The ranch house looked like it had been transported straight from a Western movie set and then left to decay for 50 years. The roof had partially collapsed on the eastern side. The porch sagged dangerously, and every window had been broken by either vandals or the harsh desert storms. She pulled her faded blue bandana from her neck and wiped the sweat from her brow. The June heat was merciless, already reaching the high 90s by mid-morning. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her olive skin had darkened further from weeks of living mostly outdoors. The worn jeans and faded t-shirt she wore, once fashion choices, now simply her most durable clothes, were stained with the red dust that seemed to permeate everything in this part of New Mexico. Behind the main house stood a small barn and what appeared to be a workshop, both in similarly advanced states of disrepair. The property stretched for nearly 40 acres, according to the deed, mostly dry scrubland dotted with sage and juniper, bounded by rocky outcroppings to the north. A broken windmill stood as a sentinel near what had once been a functional well, its metal blades groaning occasionally when caught by a strong gust. The isolation was both intimidating and appealing. The nearest neighbor was over 3 miles away, visible only as a distant rooftop on the horizon. The county road that connected to her driveway saw perhaps 5 vehicles a day, based on the minimal tracks in the dust. This remoteness had been reflected in the property's price, but it also offered something Mia had been craving: absolute creative solitude for her photography. Mia had won the auction simply because no one else had bid. The county was happy to offload the tax-delinquent property that had been abandoned since the previous owner had died, without heirs, nearly 15 years earlier. The transaction had been completed entirely online, making her the legal owner of this desolate piece of the American Southwest for less money than most people spent on a month's groceries. "I still can't believe this is actually mine," she said. Aloud, the words seeming to dissipate instantly in the vast silence surrounding her. After years of precarious housing, bouncing between roommates' couches, cramped apartments shared with too many other students, and finally her truck, the concept of owning actual land felt surreal, even if that land resembled a setting for a post-apocalyptic film. Her journey to this moment had been anything but straightforward. Born to Mexican immigrant parents who had worked tirelessly in the agricultural fields of California's Central Valley, Mia had been the first in her family to attend college. Her acceptance to the prestigious fine arts program in Santa Fe, complete with a partial scholarship, had been a moment of triumph. Proof that her eye for composition and light, developed through years of documenting her community with a second-hand camera, could translate into a genuine career path. Then came the university's budget cuts, eliminating her scholarship midway through her program. Her parents, already stretched thin supporting her younger siblings, couldn't help. Rather than abandon her degree with just 3 semesters remaining, Mia had chosen to work multiple jobs while gradually shedding the expenses she couldn't maintain. First her apartment, then her meal plan, eventually most of her possessions, except her camera equipment and laptop. As she explored the main house cautiously, testing each floorboard before putting her full weight on it, Mia documented everything with her camera. If nothing else, the atmospheric decay would make for a compelling photo series, perhaps even her final project for her BFA in photography at the State University. At least the structure is still mostly standing, she reasoned aloud, her voice echoing in the empty rooms. The interior revealed decades of neglect, peeling wallpaper from at least 3 different eras, a kitchen with fixtures dating to the 1950s, and furniture that had been partially reclaimed by desert rodents. Sunlight streamed through holes in the roof, creating dramatic light beams that illuminated swirling dust particles, an inadvertent beauty amid the devastation that Mia immediately captured with her camera. Her plan was modest: clear out the most stable room, set up her camping gear, and gradually make the place habitable enough to live in while finishing her degree. With no mortgage and property taxes of less than $100 a year due to the land's remote location and poor condition, even this ramshackle ranch represented financial freedom compared to the crushing rents in Santa Fe. The southwest corner room seemed most promising, its roof still intact, windows that could be covered with the tarp she'd brought, and solid floorboards that didn't give alarmingly when walked upon. She set her backpack down, claiming this space as the beginning of her renovation project. The fact that the nearest power line was over a mile away and the property had no functional plumbing were problems for another day. Her truck had a solar charger for her essential electronics, and she'd become accustomed to conserving water during her months of vehicle living. Professor Sandoval, her photography mentor at the university, had called her pathologically optimistic when she'd mentioned the property purchase. "Most of my students complain about their apartment's outdated fixtures," he'd said, with a mixture of concern and admiration. "You're buying an abandoned ranch that probably hasn't had running water since the Reagan administration." What he didn't understand, what few people in her current life could understand, was that Mia came from people who built something from nothing. Her grandparents had crossed the border with little more than the clothes they wore, eventually establishing enough stability for her parents to gain citizenship. Her father had transformed rocky soil into productive garden plots in their small backyard. Her mother had turned fabric scraps into quilts that kept the family warm through winter nights when heating was too expensive. Creating sustainability from scarcity was literally in her blood. Mia's exploration of the main house revealed little of interest beyond its photographic potential, just rotting furniture, animal droppings, and the scattered debris of previous trespassers. A calendar still hanging in what had been a bedroom showed March 1989, suggesting when the place had last been properly inhabited. The workshop, however, proved more intriguing. Housed in a small outbuilding with a surprisingly intact roof, it had weathered the years better than the main house. Beneath collapsed shelving and decades of dust, she found old ranching tools, spare parts for equipment long since obsolete, and surprisingly, a relatively intact desk with several drawers. Inside, one drawer, she discovered a leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed but still legible. The diary belonged to the ranch's original owner, Clarence Blackwood, who had established the property in 1924. His entries documented the challenges of ranching in the harsh environment, but what caught Mia's attention were his frequent references to the old stones and circle markings on the northern ridge. Local superstition keeps workers from the North Acres, one entry from 1926 noted. The Pueblo men refused to approach the circular formations, claiming they mark sacred ground. Henderson from the university showed interest when I mentioned the carvings, but never followed through on his promised visit. Further entries revealed Blackwood's growing frustration with periodic disappearance of cattle near the northern boundary, which local ranch hands attributed to the cursed ground, but which Blackwood suspected was due to rustlers using the superstition as cover for their activities. His attempts to document the stone formations or interest academic experts had apparently been unsuccessful, eventually leading him to avoid the area himself after several workers quit rather than tend cattle near the site. July 14, 1932, another letter from the university department went unanswered. One entry read, "With the depression hitting everyone hard, I suppose old stones are the least of their concerns. Decided to fence off the north section completely. Cheaper than constantly replacing superstitious workers. Richardson suggests I should be grateful, says there's ancient sites where they've found human remains that bring nothing but bad luck to their discoverers." Nonsense, of course, but no point fighting. The local beliefs when I've got a ranch to run. Mia's curiosity was piqued. She had chosen this remote property partly because it was the only option in her price range. But she was also drawn to the stark beauty of the landscape, perfect for the stark black and white photography style she was developing for her degree show. The mention of mysterious stone formations and carvings promised interesting compositional elements for her work. While other students in her program were creating conceptual photography in controlled studio environments, Mia had been developing a portfolio focused on the intersection of human structures and natural reclamation, abandoned buildings being slowly consumed by the elements, industrial ruins transformed by desert vegetation, the archaeology of the recent past rather than ancient history. These stone formations, if they existed, would provide an intriguing counterpoint, ancient human structures within the natural landscape. With several hours of daylight remaining, she grabbed her camera equipment, a small backpack with water and energy bars, and headed toward the rocky outcroppings visible at the northern edge of the property. The June heat beat down mercilessly as she picked her way through the scrubland, keeping alert for rattlesnakes and other hazards. The landscape gradually shifted as she moved northward, the relatively flat terrain giving way to more pronounced geological features. Erosion had carved dramatic shapes into the sandstone over millennia, creating natural sculptures that Mia paused occasionally to photograph. The muted palette of sages, ochres, and dusty reds offered subtle tonal variations that would translate beautifully to her preferred black and white medium, where texture and contrast rather than color would tell the story. After a 30-minute hike, Mia reached the base of a rocky ridge that marked the northern boundary of her property. Nothing immediately stood out as unusual, just the typical sandstone formations of the region, weathered by centuries of wind and sporadic but intense rainfall. She was about to turn back, dismissing the journal's notes as exaggeration or superstition, when she noticed an unusual pattern to some of the rocks ahead. Unlike the natural, random distribution of the surrounding stones, these appeared to form a rough circle, approximately 30 feet in diameter. As she approached, Mia realized this was no accident of nature. The stones had clearly been arranged deliberately, though they were now partly buried by sand and soil built up over what must have been centuries. "This has to be what Blackwood mentioned," she whispered, lifting her camera to document the formation. The arrangement was subtle enough that it might appear natural to casual observation, which perhaps explained why it hadn't attracted attention from others who might have explored the area after Blackwood's time. From certain angles, the circle disappeared entirely, only becoming apparent when viewed from particular positions that framed the entire arrangement. As the setting sun cast long shadows across the land, the stones revealed subtle features that would be invisible in the harsh midday light. Faint markings covered some of the larger rocks, spirals, zigzag patterns, and what appeared to be stylized animal forms. Years of exposure had weathered these petroglyphs significantly, but the intentional human origin was unmistakable. Mia's photography training had included courses in southwestern art history, enough for her to recognize that these petroglyphs were potentially very old, possibly predating Spanish colonization. What struck her as unusual was the circular arrangement, which didn't match the typical petroglyph sites she'd studied or visited on class field trips. Most documented petroglyph sites in the region featured images carved on canyon walls or random boulders, not arranged in an apparent ritual circle. The deliberate placement suggested purpose beyond simple artistic expression, perhaps astronomical alignments or ceremonial significance that would require specialized knowledge to interpret. She worked methodically, photographing each stone, with the attention to detail her professors had instilled in her, creating both documentary-style images and more artistic compositions that captured the intersection of human creation and natural weathering. The slanting sunlight dramatized the petroglyphs, making the shallow carvings more visible through the shadows they cast, a photographer's gift from the golden hour. As she photographed the site from multiple angles, careful not to disturb anything, the soil near the center of the circle caught her attention. Recent rainfall had caused minor erosion, exposing what appeared to be the edge of a flat stone surface beneath the sandy soil. Kneeling for a closer look, Mia gently brushed away some of the loose dirt, revealing more of the stone. Unlike the rough sandstone common to the area, this appeared to be a carefully smoothed piece of much harder rock, with precisely carved symbols, unlike the petroglyphs on the standing stones. The craftsmanship suggested a level of technological sophistication that contradicted her understanding of pre-Columbian cultures in this region. Her Art History 301 course on indigenous southwestern art had covered the major archaeological sites and artistic traditions of the region, from ancestral Pueblo and cliff dwellings to Navajo sand paintings, but she couldn't recall anything that matched what she was seeing. The symbols appeared to be some form of writing system, not just representational art, with repeating elements arranged in patterns that suggested linguistic rather than purely artistic intent. "This can't be what I think it is," Mia murmured. Sitting back on her heels, her limited knowledge of archaeology was enough to recognize that she might have stumbled upon something significant, perhaps even an undocumented archaeological site that had somehow escaped academic attention, despite being mentioned in Blackwood's journal nearly a century ago. She carefully photographed the exposed section of stone, using various lighting angles to highlight the carvings. The symbols seemed to radiate from a central point in concentric bands, unlike any indigenous writing system she'd studied. Some elements reminded her vaguely of Mayan glyphs she'd seen in textbooks, but the overall system appeared distinct, and potentially from a culture not extensively documented in the archaeological record of the American Southwest. The implications slowly dawned on her as she continued documenting the site. If this was indeed an undiscovered writing system from a pre-Columbian civilization, in a region not known to have developed such sophisticated communication methods, it could represent a significant gap in archaeological understanding of the area's history. The responsible course of action would be to notify proper authorities, the State Archaeological Service, or perhaps the Anthropology Department at her university. Professor Alvarez in Native American Studies would know exactly who should be contacted, but Mia also recognized that such a report might complicate her plans to live on the property. Archaeological sites often came with restrictions on land use, potential excavations that could disrupt her already precarious living situation, and legal complications she was in no position to navigate. As a first-generation college student who had sacrificed nearly everything to complete her degree, the stability of having her own place, even one as ramshackle as the ranch house, represented a crucial foothold that she couldn't risk losing. Archaeological significance wouldn't pay her tuition or keep her from having to drop out just semesters short of her degree. Yet as she studied the symbols more closely, another consideration weighed on her. Her Mexican heritage connected her, at least broadly, to the indigenous populations whose histories had been systematically erased since colonization. The erasure of native history and culture was something she had studied both academically and understood personally through her family's complex relationship with their own indigenous roots. To discover potentially significant archaeological evidence and not report it would perpetuate that erasure in a way that conflicted with her values. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the landscape in deepening purples and blues, Mia carefully covered the exposed stone with the same soil she had brushed away, ensuring it was protected from the elements. She marked the location with her phone's GPS, created detailed notes about what she had found, and took one final sweeping video of the site before heading back to the ranch house. The discovery presented a dilemma that she would need to consider carefully. For tonight, she would set up her camping gear in the most stable corner of the house and attempt to get some sleep before deciding her next steps. Perhaps in the morning, with clearer perspective, she could find a solution that balanced her personal needs with the potential historical significance of what she had found. The walk back to the ranch house in the gathering darkness gave her time to process the implications of her discovery. Night in the desert brought dramatic temperature drops, and by the time she reached the structure, her thin jacket was necessary against the cooling air. The stark silhouette of the decrepit buildings against the darkening sky created another compelling image that she paused to capture. The human structure, small and impermanent, against the vastness of the desert and emerging stars. Inside, what would be her room? Mia set up her camping gear, an insulated sleeping pad, compact sleeping bag, and battery-powered lantern that cast long shadows across the weathered walls. She heated a simple meal of ramen noodles on her camping stove, the steam creating momentary warmth in the cool evening air. As she ate, she reviewed the photographs on her camera's display screen, zooming in on details of the symbols that hadn't been apparent to her naked eye. The precision of some carvings was remarkable, considering their apparent age, suggesting tools and techniques that contradicted the prevailing archaeological narrative about technological development in the region. Following her usual workflow, Mia connected her camera to her laptop and uploaded the day's images to both her local drive and the university's cloud storage system, where she maintained her portfolio for professor feedback. The automatic synchronization with the department's review folder was a standard practice for students in the BFA program, allowing for ongoing critique and guidance between formal class sessions. Professor Sandoval had been particularly supportive of her documentary work on abandoned structures, providing guidance on composition and thematic development that had significantly improved her technical skills. After organizing the images into folders by location and subject matter, Mia created a brief project note describing her initial concept for a series on the intersection of natural landscape and human intervention across different time periods, from ancient petroglyphs to 20th century ranch structures, all within the boundaries of her newly acquired property. What Mia couldn't know, as she settled into her sleeping bag that night, was that her innocent photography project had captured evidence of a site that would soon draw international archaeological attention. The photographs she uploaded to her cloud storage that evening, intended only as potential material for her BFA thesis, contained images of symbols that hadn't been seen by human eyes for nearly a millennium, from a civilization whose existence had been theorized but never proven. When the images automatically shared to her university department's review folder for student projects, they would set in motion a chain of events that would bring renowned archaeologists to her $500 property. At dawn, transforming both the abandoned ranch and Mia's life in ways she couldn't possibly imagine as she drifted to sleep beneath the stars visible through the partially collapsed roof. Her last conscious thought before sleep claimed her was a vague plan to visit the anthropology department the next day, perhaps to casually inquire about petroglyphs without specifically mentioning her discovery. Just to gather information, she told herself, to better understand what she was dealing with, before making any decisions that might compromise her precarious stability. The distant howl of a coyote was the final sound she registered, a reminder that in this isolated landscape she was surrounded by forces both natural and historical that had long preceded her brief human presence and would likely continue long after she was gone. Professor Elena Vasquez was working late in her office at the university's Department of Anthropology and Archaeology when the email notification appeared on her screen. As the Southwest's leading expert on pre-Columbian writing systems, she received numerous messages daily from colleagues and students, most containing images of common petroglyphs mistaken for undocumented writing systems. This email, however, was different. It came from Professor Sandoval in the Fine Arts Department, with whom she had collaborated on an interdisciplinary course exploring the documentation of archaeological sites through various artistic mediums. The subject line read simply, "Urgent, unusual symbols documented by my student." Elena, one of my photography students, uploaded these images to our department's review folder tonight, the message began. They appear to be from some kind of archaeological site on a property she recently purchased. I'm not qualified to evaluate their significance, but they don't match anything I've seen in our region's documented petroglyph styles. Given your expertise, I thought you should see these immediately. The attached photographs showed what appeared to be a stone circle with weathered petroglyphs, interesting but not extraordinary by themselves. However, the close-up images of the central stone made Eleanor sit up straight, her attention suddenly focused completely on the screen. The symbols, carved into the smooth stone, were unlike anything in the established archaeological record of the American Southwest. "This can't be right," she murmured, enlarging the images to examine the details more carefully. The organized pattern of recurring symbols, their deliberate arrangement in concentric bands, and the precision of their execution all suggested a formal writing system, something that wasn't supposed to exist in this region during the pre-Columbian. In period, current archaeological understanding held that true writing systems in the Americas had been limited to Mesoamerican civilizations like the Maya and Aztec, with nothing similar developing independently in what was now the southwestern United States. The prevailing theory was that indigenous cultures in this region had developed sophisticated symbolic communication through rock art and other media, but not true writing with standardized symbols representing specific linguistic elements. These symbols, however, displayed the hallmark characteristics of a genuine logographic or syllabic writing system: consistent forms, apparent organizational structure, and repetition patterns that suggested syntactic relationships. If authentic, they could potentially rewrite archaeological understanding of pre-Columbian cultural development in the entire region. Elena immediately picked up her phone and called Dr. Marcus Thompson, the department chair, and her longtime research collaborator. "Marcus, I need you to look at something right now," she said, without preamble when he answered. "I'm forwarding you photographs that appear to show an undocumented writing system from somewhere in our region. This isn't like anything we've seen before. At this hour, can't it wait until—" "No," she interrupted firmly. "If these are authentic, they could represent the most significant discovery in southwestern archaeology in decades. I need your assessment before I proceed." While waiting for his response, Elena searched through the department's digital archives, comparing the symbols to every documented petroglyph style from the region. Nothing matched. She then expanded her search to include Mesoamerican writing systems, looking for potential cultural diffusion or influence. While some elements bore superficial resemblance to certain Maya glyphs, the overall system appeared entirely distinct. Dr. Thompson's voice was considerably more alert when he called back 20 minutes later. "Where did these come from? Are they authenticated? Have they been documented properly in situ?" "They came through Professor Sandoval in Fine Arts. One of his photography students apparently found these on property she recently purchased. I've already requested the exact location and permission to visit the site immediately. If she's amenable, I'd like to assemble a preliminary assessment team for first thing tomorrow morning." "Agreed. I'll make calls to the State Archaeologists' Office and the Indigenous Consultation Committee. We need to move quickly but properly, following all protocols for potential sacred sites while securing the location from possible damage or looting once word gets out." Elena had already begun assembling the necessary forms and permissions that would be required. As a specialist in indigenous writing systems who had spent 2 decades building relationships with tribal authorities throughout the Southwest, she understood the complex ethical, legal, and cultural considerations involved in such discoveries. "We should also contact Richard Blackburn at Smithsonian," she added. "If this is what it appears to be, we'll need his expertise on unknown writing systems. And someone from the university legal department should be involved from the beginning. If this is on private property, we need to establish proper agreements immediately." By midnight, what had begun as casual review of a student's photographs had escalated into a full-scale mobilization of archaeological resources. Elena had spoken directly with Professor Sandoval, obtained the student's contact information, and learned that the site was located on a remote ranch property recently purchased at a tax auction. While she hadn't yet been able to reach the student directly, cellular service was apparently non-existent at the property. Preparations were underway for an early morning visit with a preliminary assessment team. Dr. Thompson had secured emergency authorization from the State Archaeologists' Office, contingent upon consent from the property owner and pending consultation with indigenous representatives. The university's legal counsel had been roused from bed to draft preliminary agreements protecting both the potential archaeological site and the property owner's rights, documents that could be presented immediately upon arrival. Shortly after 5 a.m., a small convoy of vehicles departed the university campus, heading toward the coordinates extracted from the digital photograph's metadata. The team included Elena, Dr. Thompson, a university legal representative, a state archaeology office liaison, and 2 graduate students with expertise in field documentation. Dr. Richard Blackburn from the Smithsonian had caught a red-eye flight from Washington, D.C., and would meet them at the site by mid-morning if preliminary assessment warranted his expertise. As dawn broke over the desert landscape, Elena reviewed what little they knew about the site and its owner. Mia Reyes was a senior BFA student specializing in documentary photography, particularly abandoned structures and human-altered landscapes. She had apparently purchased the property through an online tax auction for the minimum bid of $500, intending to live there while completing her degree. Professor Sandoval described her as exceptionally talented, fiercely independent, and somewhat precarious financially, suggesting they should approach the situation with sensitivity to her circumstances. The convoy turned onto an unmarked dirt road that matched the GPS coordinates, the vehicles bouncing over washboard ruts as they proceeded deeper into the seemingly empty landscape. After several miles, a ramshackle collection of structures appeared on the horizon, the abandoned ranch that now belonged to Mia Reyes. Elena felt the familiar tension that accompanied potentially significant discoveries, excitement tempered by professional caution. Throughout her career, she had learned that extraordinary claims required extraordinary evidence, and many initially promising finds had proven to be misinterpretations, natural formations with coincidental resemblance to human artifacts or occasionally deliberate hoaxes. Yet something about these images suggested authenticity. They displayed subtle characteristics that would be difficult to fabricate without extensive knowledge of ancient writing systems. As they approached the property, the dilapidated condition of the structures became apparent. The main house had partially collapsed, the outbuildings were deteriorating, and the entire site showed decades of neglect. A battered pickup truck was parked beside the house, the only sign of current habitation. "This is definitely not what I expected," Dr. Thompson murmured as they pulled up to the property. "Are we certain this is the correct location?" "The coordinates match," Elena confirmed, gathering her materials. "And that must be her truck. Remember, Professor Sandoval mentioned she's living here in extremely basic conditions." As they parked their vehicles, the front door of the house opened, and a young woman emerged, clearly startled by the arrival of multiple vehicles so early in the morning. She was dressed in simple work clothes, her hair tied back, and her expression suggested wariness rather than welcome. Elena approached first, extending her hand. "Ms. Reyes, I'm Professor Elena Vasquez from the Anthropology Department. I apologize for arriving unannounced, but we believe you may have made a discovery of potentially significant archaeological importance." Mia's expression shifted from surprise to confusion and then to understanding as she glanced at the university logos on their vehicles. "This is about the photographs I uploaded last night, isn't it? How did you even find me?" Professor Sandoval forwarded your images to me for assessment, given my expertise in pre-Columbian symbols. The photographs' metadata contained location information, Elena explained gently, aware that this might feel like an invasion of privacy. "The symbols you documented are unlike anything previously recorded in this region. If authentic, they could represent an extremely significant discovery." Dr. Thompson joined them, introducing himself and the rest of the team that was now assembling behind him. "Ms. Reyes, I understand this is unexpected, but we'd like to discuss the possibility of conducting a preliminary assessment of the site you photographed. Of course, as the property owner, you have complete authority over whether to grant permission." Mia looked overwhelmed by the sudden arrival of experts on her doorstep. The simple decision to upload photographs for a class project had somehow escalated to a gathering of archaeological authorities before breakfast. "I was planning to ask about them at the Anthropology Department today. I didn't expect a whole team to show up." Eleanor nodded understandingly. "I'm sure this seems like an overreaction, but if what you've discovered is what we suspect, it could potentially change our understanding of pre-Columbian cultures in the entire Southwest. Would you be willing to show us the site and discuss how we might proceed?" Mia hesitated, glancing back at the deteriorating house that represented her tenuous foothold on stability. "Before we go anywhere, I need to understand what this means. For me and my property, I bought this place because it was the only housing I could afford. I can't risk losing access to it due to archaeological restrictions." The legal representative stepped forward, introducing herself. Ms. Reyes, that's a completely legitimate concern. I've brought preliminary agreements that would protect your property rights while allowing for appropriate archaeological assessment. The university is prepared to discuss compensation for access and potential cooperative arrangements that could benefit your situation rather than complicate it. This direct acknowledgement of her practical concerns seemed to ease some of Mia's tension. I haven't had breakfast yet, and I'm guessing none of you have either. Why don't you come inside, or what's left of it, and we can talk about this before hiking out to the site. The interior of the house revealed Mia's extremely basic living conditions. A camping setup in one corner of the most stable room, a small propane stove, and plastic bins containing her limited possessions. Despite the primitive arrangements, the space showed signs of her artistic sensibility, with carefully arranged found objects and a makeshift display of photographs pinned to the least damaged wall. As they settled on various improvised seating, camp chairs, crates, and one structurally questionable wooden bench, Mia prepared coffee on her camping stove, the domestic activity seeming incongruously normal amid the extraordinary circumstances. "So these symbols are really that significant?" she asked, handing out mugs of coffee in what appeared to be her entire collection of mismatched cups. "I recognized they were different from typical petroglyphs, but I don't have enough background to understand what that means archaeologically." Elena accepted the coffee gratefully, the early morning start catching up with her. "Based on your photographs, they appear to represent a formal writing system, something that isn't supposed to exist in this region during the pre-Columbian period. If authentic, they could indicate an undocumented civilization with literacy or cultural connections to Mesoamerican societies that weren't previously known. The circular arrangement is also unusual," Dr. Thompson added. "Most petroglyph sites in this region don't show such deliberate structural organization. Combined with the sophistication of the central stone symbols, it suggests ritual or astronomical significance beyond typical rock art." Mia seemed to process this information, her initial wariness gradually giving way to curiosity. She retrieved her laptop and opened the complete set of photographs she had taken, including many not uploaded to the university system. "I documented everything as thoroughly as possible. It's how I was trained in my documentary photography courses. These might show more details than what you've seen." The additional photographs confirmed Elena's initial assessment while revealing further details about the site. The symbols were more extensive than originally apparent, with the central stone showing what appeared to be a complete text arranged in concentric bands. The standing stones forming the circle contained simpler but related symbols, suggesting a coherent system rather than random markings. "Ms. Reyes, your documentation is exceptional," Elena said sincerely. "You've captured details that would satisfy professional archaeological standards, particularly the various lighting angles showing different aspects of the carvings." "Photography is my field," Mia replied with a modest shrug, though she clearly appreciated the professional validation. "I was mostly thinking about the compositional possibilities for my thesis project, but I knew enough from art history to recognize these might have historical significance." As they reviewed the photographs, the legal representative outlined the university's proposed approach. A preliminary assessment team would document the site properly, with Mia retaining full property rights and control over access. If the site proved to be of significant archaeological importance, various options could be discussed, from research agreements with financial compensation to potential designation that might include grants for property improvement while maintaining her ownership. "Our primary concern is proper documentation and preservation," the representative explained. "But we're equally committed to ensuring this discovery benefits rather than burdens you as the property owner." Mia considered this. Her practical concerns evident. I'm living on basically nothing right now. That's why I bought a $500 ranch with no utilities. I can't afford complications, but I also understand this might be historically important. If we can find an arrangement that allows me to continue living here while finishing my degree, I'm open to cooperation. With preliminary understanding established, Mia agreed to guide them to the site. The hike took approximately 30 minutes across increasingly rocky terrain, with Mia pointing out features of the landscape she had documented in her photography. Elena was impressed by the young woman's observational skills and her genuine appreciation for the desert environment, qualities that had likely contributed to her discovery where others might have missed the subtle arrangement of stones. When they reached the site, the impact on the archaeological team was immediate and profound. What had been impressive in photographs was remarkable in person. A clearly deliberate circle of standing stones, weathered by centuries, but undeniably arranged by human hands, surrounding a central area where recent rainfall had exposed part of a carved stone surface. Elena approached reverently, her decades of archaeological experience heightening rather than diminishing her sense of wonder at such discoveries. The morning light revealed details less visible in Mia's evening photographs. Subtle patterns in the arrangement of stones that suggested astronomical alignments, weathered but discernible pathways leading to and from the circle, and additional petroglyphs on the surrounding rock formations that appeared to direct movement toward the site. "This is extraordinary," Dr. Thompson breathed, his customary academic reserve momentarily abandoned. The positioning alone suggests sophisticated understanding of solar and possibly lunar movements, and these are definitely not random placements. The mathematics of this arrangement is deliberate. Mia watched as the team moved with practiced efficiency, employing far more sophisticated equipment than her camera to document the site. Laser scanning devices, specialized photography with various light frequencies, soil testing kits, and detailed measuring instruments were deployed with minimal disturbance to the site itself. "We're conducting non-invasive preliminary documentation," Elena explained to Mia, who observed with evident interest. "No excavation or disturbance until proper permissions are secured, including consultations with indigenous representatives. But even this surface documentation will tell us a great deal." The graduate students had begun creating a digital, three-dimensional model of the entire site, capturing every stone and carving in precise detail. Meanwhile, Dr. Thompson carefully studied the astronomical implications of the stone placements, measuring angles and sightlines with specialized equipment. "The central stone is the key," Elena said, kneeling carefully beside the partially exposed carved surface. "If you're comfortable with it, I'd like to document what's visible without removing any additional soil. Proper excavation would require much more formal permissions and procedures." Mia nodded her agreement, and Elena proceeded to photograph and measure the exposed section with extraordinary care. The symbols visible on the stone surface appeared to be arranged in concentric bands, with what seemed to be a central glyph surrounded by radiating patterns of additional symbols. "These aren't representational images," Elena explained for Mia's benefit. "In petroglyph traditions, you typically see stylized but recognizable figures, animals, humans, natural phenomena. These are abstract symbols repeated in patterned ways that strongly suggest linguistic function, a true writing system." After several hours of meticulous documentation, Elena's phone chimed with a message. "Dr. Blackburn from the Smithsonian has landed and is en route. He's bringing specialized equipment for preliminary dating and analysis." The mention of the Smithsonian made the significance of the discovery even more concrete for Mia. Her simple decision to explore her property had apparently uncovered something worthy of national attention from the country's premier research institution. "I still don't understand how this could have remained undiscovered," she said, watching the archaeologists work. "The journal I found mentioned it back in the 1920s, but apparently no one from the university ever followed up properly." Dr. Thompson looked up from his measurements. "Unfortunately, that's not uncommon, especially during certain historical periods. The 1920s and 30s saw economic challenges that limited academic expeditions, and by the time resources became more available in the post-war period, this information was likely buried in unexamined archives. If the local ranch hands avoided the area due to cultural beliefs, and the property remained in private hands with owners who either respected those beliefs or simply had no interest, it could easily have escaped formal documentation." "There's also the matter of visibility," Elena added. "You discovered this because you have a photographer's eye for composition and pattern. From most angles, this appears to be a natural rock formation. The circle is only apparent from certain perspectives, and the central stone was mostly buried until recent rainfall exposed part of it. Many people could have walked through this area without recognizing what they were seeing." Around noon, another vehicle arrived at the base of the ridge, and a man carrying specialized equipment cases made his way up to the site, accompanied by the university liaison who had remained with the vehicles. Dr. Richard Blackburn, the Smithsonian's leading expert on undocumented writing systems, was a tall, lanky man in his 60s whose enthusiasm seemed undiminished by his overnight flight. "Elena, Marcus!" he called out as he approached, his British accent distinct. "I came as quickly as possible. The photographs you sent are absolutely tantalizing. Please tell me they're as promising in person." Elena made introductions, including Mia, whom Blackburn regarded with evident respect. "Ms. Reyes, you've potentially made an extraordinary contribution to our understanding of pre-Columbian cultures. Your photographer's eye recognized what many trained archaeologists might have missed." With Blackburn's arrival, the assessment entered a new phase. His specialized equipment included portable X-ray fluorescence devices for non-invasive material, analysis and advanced imaging technology that could detect pigments and carvings invisible to the naked eye. "We need to establish whether these symbols are consistent with known writing systems or represent something entirely unique," Blackburn explained as he calibrated his equipment. "And we must determine, at least preliminarily, their approximate age and cultural context." As the team worked, Mia found herself increasingly drawn into their discussions, her initial concerns about property rights gradually overshadowed by genuine intellectual curiosity. Her art history background provided enough context to follow. The archaeological discussions and her photographer's perspective offered insights the specialists occasionally missed. The contrast between these simpler marks on the standing stones and the complex symbols on the central stone reminds me of how religious texts are often presented, she observed at one point. The outer circle has basic, repeating elements that anyone might recognize, while the central text appears much more sophisticated, like the difference between common religious symbols and actual scriptural text. Blackburn paused in his analysis, regarding her with fresh interest. "That's an astute observation, and consistent with how certain ceremonial sites functioned in various cultures. The accessible, recognizable symbols for general participants, with more complex texts reserved for those with specialized knowledge or authority. Your artistic training gives you valuable perspective on visual communication systems." By late afternoon, the preliminary assessment had yielded enough information for initial conclusions to be drawn. The team gathered near the edge of the site to discuss their findings while the graduate students continued documentation. "Based on non-invasive analysis, we're looking at symbols carved approximately 800 to 1,000 years ago," Blackburn summarized. "The material composition and weathering patterns are consistent with that time frame. The symbols themselves show some distant relationship to Mesoamerican writing systems, but appear to represent a previously undocumented tradition specific to this region. The astronomical alignments suggest the site was actively used for solstice and equinox observations, Dr. Thompson added. The mathematical precision of the stone placements indicates sophisticated understanding of celestial movements. This wasn't created by casual observers, but by people with dedicated astronomical knowledge. Elena turned to Mia, translating the archaeological jargon into more accessible terms. What this means, essentially, is that your property contains evidence of a previously undocumented culture with mathematical sophistication, astronomical knowledge, and a true writing system, all of which contradicts current understanding of pre-Columbian development in this region. Mia absorbed this information, recognizing its significance far beyond her personal situation. So this changes how we understand the history of this entire area. Potentially the entire Southwest, Blackburn confirmed. If we can decipher even portions of this writing system, it could provide insight into a culture that existing archaeological records haven't captured. This represents a gap in our understanding that might connect previously separate cultural traditions in ways we haven't recognized. As the sun began its westward descent, casting longer shadows across the stone circle, the team made preparations to return to the vehicles. The preliminary documentation was complete, with terabytes of data collected through various sophisticated recording methods. The graduate students had created detailed maps of the entire site, including three-dimensional models that could be studied remotely. Ms. Reyes, Elena said as they prepared to leave, we need to discuss next steps. The significance of this site is clearly established by our preliminary assessment. What we've found warrants much more extensive study with proper permissions and protocols. The university legal representative stepped forward with a more detailed agreement than the preliminary documents discussed earlier. We've prepared options that would protect your property rights while allowing for proper archaeological study. These include financial compensation for access, potential grant opportunities for property improvements, and guarantees regarding your continued use of the land. Mia looked at the documents, then at the stone circle that had unexpectedly transformed her simple housing solution into something far more complex. I need time to review this properly. This is all happening very quickly, and I want to make sure I understand the implications fully. Of course, Elena agreed. That's completely reasonable. But there's another consideration we should discuss before leaving: site security. Now that we've confirmed the significance of this discovery, protecting it becomes paramount. Once word spreads, there's potential risk from looters or simply curious visitors who might inadvertently damage the site. This concern resonated with Mia, who had already developed a sense of responsibility toward the ancient site. I'm living on the property, but I can't exactly monitor this location constantly, especially since it's a 30-minute hike from the house. Dr. Thompson proposed a solution. The university could provide temporary security measures, motion-activated cameras, periodic monitoring by graduate students who could camp near the site, even satellite monitoring of the area. All of this would be non-intrusive and coordinated with your permission, of course. The discussion continued as they hiked back to the ranch house, with various practical considerations woven through the archaeological significance. By the time they reached the vehicles, preliminary agreements had been established. The university would provide immediate site security measures with Mia's permission. Formal study proposals would be developed for her review, and compensation options would be detailed in writing. We'll also expedite consultations with indigenous representatives, Elena assured Mia. Their perspectives on this discovery are essential, both ethically and legally. Any formal study would include their participation and guidance. As the archaeological team prepared to depart, Dr. Blackburn approached Mia with a final observation. Ms. Reyes, in my 40 years of archaeological work, I've found that significant discoveries often come from unexpected sources. Your photographers' perspective recognized patterns that traditional archaeological surveys might have missed. I hope you'll consider remaining involved with the study of this site. Your unique viewpoint has already proven valuable. The convoy of vehicles departed as the setting sun painted the desert landscape in deepening oranges and purples. Mia stood outside her dilapidated ranch house, watching until the dust clouds from their departure faded into the distance. The quiet that settled afterward seemed more profound than before. The same physical silence, but now filled with the weight of historical significance. Inside, Mia reviewed the preliminary agreements and information packages the team had left. The financial considerations were substantial, access fees that exceeded her annual income as a part-time barista, potential grants for property improvements that could transform the uninhabitable ranch house into a functional dwelling, and even scholarship opportunities given the educational significance of the discovery. Beyond the immediate practical benefits, the materials included information about the potential historical importance of the site. Preliminary assessments suggested the stone circle and its writing system could represent a previously undocumented cultural tradition, perhaps a connecting link between the ancestral Puebloan cultures to the north and Mesoamerican civilizations to the south. If decipherable, the symbols might provide insight into migration patterns, cultural exchanges, and historical events not captured in existing archaeological records. As night fell completely, Mia stepped outside again, looking toward the northern ridge, where ancient hands had arranged stones and carved symbols nearly a millennium ago. The stars emerged in the clear desert sky, the same stars those ancient astronomers had observed and mapped through their precise stone arrangements. The connection across time felt tangible in that moment, a continuum of human observation and creation spanning centuries. Her phone chimed with a message from Professor Sandoval. Just heard from Elena Vasquez about your discovery. Extraordinary. When you're back on campus, please come see me. This could be developed into a remarkable thesis project integrating photography and historical documentation. The academic opportunity hadn't even occurred to her amidst the whirlwind of archaeological excitement. Her BFA thesis focused on human structures reclaimed by nature, and here was an example spanning nearly 1,000 years, with her photography serving as the bridge between ancient communication and modern understanding. The artistic possibilities were as significant as the archaeological ones. A second message arrived from Eleanor. CNN just contacted the university press office about a significant archaeological discovery in New Mexico. Word is spreading faster than anticipated. Security team will arrive tomorrow morning. Please call if anyone appears at the property before then. The outside world was already closing in on her private discovery. The remote ranch that had represented isolation and creative solitude would soon become a focal point of academic and media attention. Her $500 property suddenly the center of historical reassessment. Mia's thoughts returned to the journal she had found in the workshop, with its casual mentions of the old stones that local ranch hands had avoided. Clarence Blackwood had dismissed their concerns as superstition, never recognizing the historical significance of what lay on his property. For nearly a century, the stone circle had remained undocumented in academic records, protected partly by local indigenous knowledge that kept people away, and partly by its remote location on private property. Now she found herself in a position of unexpected responsibility. Decisions she would make about access and study would potentially affect historical understanding of an entire region. The first-generation college student who had been living in her truck just days earlier now held the keys to what might prove to be one of the most significant archaeological discoveries in the Southwest in decades. As she prepared for sleep in her camping setup inside the dilapidated ranch house, Mia reflected on the extraordinary turn her life had taken in just 24 hours. The desperate search for affordable housing had led her to this remote property, where her photographer's eye had recognized patterns others had missed for generations. The simple act of documenting what she found, a basic habit from her photography training, had triggered a chain of events that now connected her to institutions as prestigious as the Smithsonian. What would come next remained uncertain. The agreements proposed by the university and archaeologists seemed genuinely beneficial, offering financial stability while respecting her property rights. But she recognized the need for careful consideration before committing to anything formal. The discovery's significance extended far beyond her personal circumstances, potentially rewriting understanding of pre-Columbian cultural development in ways that would affect indigenous communities, academic institutions, and historical narratives. Her last thought before drifting to sleep was not about archaeology or financial considerations, but about her parents, immigrants who had crossed borders and worked tirelessly in agricultural fields to create opportunities for their children. How could she explain to them that the seemingly reckless purchase of an abandoned ranch had potentially led to historical discovery, academic recognition, and financial stability all at once? The improbable journey from their sacrifices to this moment seemed connected to the improbable survival of ancient symbols across a millennium, both representing persistence against overwhelming odds. Outside, under the vast canopy of stars, the stone circle stood as it had for centuries, silent, patient, and waiting to be understood. The symbols carved by long-forgotten hands would soon be scrutinized by the world's leading experts, their meanings debated in academic journals and conference presentations. The remote location that had preserved them from discovery would become a destination for researchers and eventually perhaps a protected historical site accessible to the public. For tonight, however, they remained Mia's discovery, a secret shared between a young photographer seeking shelter and ancient astronomers, who had mapped the heavens from this same desert landscape nearly 1,000 years earlier. Morning arrived with the distinctive sound of vehicles approaching, earlier and more numerous than Mia had anticipated. Emerging from the ranch house, she found not just the promised security team from the university, but also a tribal, cultural, and preservation officer, additional archaeologists, and most surprisingly, a film crew setting up equipment near the property entrance. Ms. Reyes, a woman in a pressed blazer, approached, hand extended. "I'm Amanda Chen from the university's Public Relations Department. News of the discovery has generated significant media interest. We were hoping you might be willing to participate in controlled press access. On your terms, of course." Before Mia could respond, another vehicle arrived and Dr. Blackburn emerged, looking significantly more polished than during yesterday's field assessment. "Ah, I see the media circus has already begun," he observed with a wry smile. "Ms. Reyes, I apologize for this invasion. Academic discoveries rarely remain academic for long in the age of social media." Elena Vasquez arrived moments later, hurrying to Mia's side with evident concern. "This is not how we planned to proceed," she said apologetically. "Someone at the university leaked information to the press before proper protocols were established. We're trying to manage the situation, but ultimately, as the property owner, you have full authority over who accesses your land." The tribal, cultural preservation officer, a dignified woman introduced as Josephine Begay from the nearby Pueblo community, added her perspective. "Ms. Reyes, Our primary concern is ensuring that any sacred aspects of this site are respected. We would appreciate the opportunity to conduct proper cultural consultation before public exposure. Mia found herself at the center of competing interests: academic, media, cultural, and personal. The quiet ranch that had represented affordable housing and creative solitude just 2 days earlier had transformed into what felt like a hastily assembled film set. With her expected to take a leading role she hadn't auditioned for, drawing on reserves of composure she hadn't known she possessed, Mia addressed the assembled group. "I understand everyone's enthusiasm, but this is happening too quickly. No media access today. The security team can establish their measures, and I'll meet with Ms. Begay and the archaeological team to discuss proper protocols. Everyone else needs to leave until formal agreements are in place." The assertiveness of her response seemed to surprise some of the arrivals, who perhaps had expected the student property owner to be easily managed. Elena nodded approvingly as the public relations representative reluctantly herded the disappointed media crew back toward their vehicles. "You handled that perfectly," she told Mia quietly. "Archaeological discoveries often generate this kind of frenzy, but proper study requires careful, methodical approaches, not media spectacles." With the immediate pressure of media attention temporarily diffused, Mia was able to focus on the more substantive discussions with Josephine Begay and the archaeological team. They gathered in the shade of the workshop, the most intact structure on the property, where folding tables had been set up with maps and documentation from the previous day's assessment. From a cultural perspective, this site appears to have significant ceremonial importance, Josephine explained, examining the detailed photographs. The astronomical alignments and writing system suggest it may have been used by spiritual leaders or knowledge keepers. Our oral traditions include references to ancient sites where star readers recorded celestial knowledge, though specific locations have been lost over centuries of displacement and cultural disruption. Dr. Blackburn shared preliminary analysis conducted overnight on the digital models created during the initial assessment. The symbols show internal consistency, suggesting a formal writing system with established rules. Some elements bear distant relationship to Mesoamerican systems, particularly in the use of positional notation, but the majority appear unique. This could represent either an independent development or a significant regional adaptation of influences. From further south, the discussion continued through the morning, with technical archaeological considerations balanced against cultural significance and property rights. Mia found herself increasingly engaged with the intellectual aspects of the discovery, her art history background providing enough context to follow the experts' discussions, while her practical concerns ensured attention to real-world implications. By midday, a framework for moving forward had been established. Formal archaeological study would proceed with indigenous consultation at every stage. The university would provide compensation for access and security. Mia's continued residence on the property would be protected and supported through targeted grants for basic improvements, and carefully managed public information would be released only after initial scholarly documentation was complete. "There's one additional consideration," Elena added as they concluded the meeting. "Ms. Reyes, your unique position as both the property owner and the person who recognized the site's significance places you in a potentially important role beyond simply granting access. Your photographic documentation was exceptional, and your artistic perspective has already provided valuable insights. Would you consider formal involvement with the research project? We could structure it to complement your BFA studies, possibly even developing into graduate work if that interests you." The offer represented a potential merging of Mia's artistic training with the historical significance of her discovery, an unexpected academic and professional path that hadn't existed in her imagining just days earlier. "I'd need to discuss this with my photography professors," she replied thoughtfully. "But yes, I'm interested in remaining involved beyond just property access. This feels like something I should see through, not just hand off to experts and walk away." As the meeting concluded and the various specialists departed to their respective tasks, security personnel establishing monitoring systems, archaeologists preparing formal research proposals, and Josephine consulting with tribal elders by phone, Maya found herself momentarily alone in the workshop where she had first discovered Blackwood's journal. The leather-bound volume still lay on the desk where she had left it, its casual mentions of the old stones now revealed as references to what might prove a historically significant archaeological site. She leafed through the pages again, finding additional notes she had overlooked in her initial reading, sketches of individual stones, mentions. The leather-bound volume still lay on the desk where she had left it, its casual mentions of the old stones now revealed as references to what might prove a historically significant archaeological site. She leafed through the pages again, finding additional notes she had overlooked in her initial reading, sketches of individual stones, mentions of strange markings unlike any Indian pictures I've seen, and unsuccessful attempts to interest. University researchers decades ago. "If only you knew what was really on your property, Mr. Blackwood," she murmured to the long-dead rancher whose journal had guided her to the discovery. His dismissal of local indigenous knowledge as mere superstition had prevented him from recognizing the significance of what lay on his northern ridge, a pattern of dismissal that had potentially delayed archaeological discovery for nearly a century. Through the workshop window, Mia could see the security team installing discrete cameras on the property, their modern technology now monitoring symbols carved centuries before European contact. The juxtaposition of ancient communication and cutting-edge surveillance technology embodied the extraordinary convergence of time frames that her simple house-hunting decision had precipitated. Her phone chimed with a message from Professor Sandoval, who had apparently been following developments from campus. "Elena tells me you're considering formal involvement with the research project. The department is prepared to adapt your BFA requirements to incorporate this discovery, potentially the most significant thesis project our program has ever seen. Come see me when you're back on campus." The academic opportunity this represented was substantial. Her work suddenly elevated from student photography to documentation of historical significance, potentially launching a career at the intersection of art and archaeology that she hadn't previously considered. The financial implications were equally transformative, with access fees and grants potentially resolving the precarious situation that had led her to purchase the abandoned ranch in the first place. As evening approached, the property gradually emptied of visitors, with only 2 graduate students remaining to monitor the security systems overnight from a tent set up near the main house. The quiet that settled over the ranch felt different now, not the isolation of abandonment, but the protected stillness of something recognized as valuable and worth preserving. Mia walked to a small rise near the house, where the northern ridge was visible in the distance. Somewhere among those rocks, ancient astronomers had created a sophisticated system for recording celestial observations and preserving knowledge through a written language that modern experts hadn't known existed in this region. Their work had remained hidden for centuries, protected partly by indigenous knowledge that kept people away and partly by academic oversight that failed to follow up on reports of strange markings. The story of this discovery was rapidly expanding beyond her personal experience, already involving prestigious institutions, cultural authorities, and academic specialists. Yet it had begun with her simple need for affordable housing and her photographer's ability to recognize patterns in the landscape. The broke student living out of her truck had unwittingly purchased not just shelter, but potentially one of the most significant archaeological sites documented in the region in decades. As darkness fell completely and stars emerged above the desert landscape, Mia considered how thoroughly her life had been transformed in just 3 days. From homeless student to property owner to archaeological discoverer, each step unplanned, yet somehow connected through her persistent effort to create stability against challenging odds. Whatever came next would evolve from this extraordinary convergence of personal necessity and historical significance. Her $500 ranch, now connected to institutions as prestigious as the Smithsonian and cultural traditions stretching back a millennium. The distant howl of a coyote echoed across the desert, a reminder that this land had witnessed countless human stories before hers, including those of the ancient astronomers whose carved symbols had waited patiently through centuries for someone to recognize their significance. In the vast perspective of that time frame, her own surprising journey from precarious student to archaeological discoverer seemed simultaneously insignificant and perfectly aligned with the persistent human pattern of finding meaning in unexpected places. 3 months after discovering the stone circle on her remote property, Mia Reyes stood beside Dr. Elena Vasquez in the newly constructed research facility that now occupied a portion of her land. The prefabricated structure, a stark contrast to her still dilapidated ranch house, housed climate-controlled workspaces, advanced imaging equipment, and a dedicated team of researchers from 3 universities and the Smithsonian Institution. The translation progress has exceeded our most optimistic projections, Elena explained, as they examined the 3-dimensional digital reconstruction of the central stone displayed on a wall-size screen. We've identified 94 distinct symbols that appear to function within a logosyllabic system, conceptually similar to Maya writing, but with completely unique graphemes and syntactic structures. Mia studied the color-coded symbols, each now assigned a reference number and potential meaning based on pattern analysis. Her initial photographs had captured approximately 60% of the writing system. Careful excavation had revealed the remainder of the central stone and additional carved elements previously hidden beneath centuries of accumulated soil and debris. "And you're certain about the astronomical calendar functions?" she asked, pointing to a specific band of symbols arranged in a circular pattern around the central glyph. "As certain as we can be without direct linguistic connection to the culture that created it," Eleanor confirmed. "The mathematical relationships between these repeating elements correspond precisely to lunar cycles and solstice alignments. Dr. Thompson believes they were tracking not just seasonal changes, but also eclipse patterns with remarkable accuracy." The scale and significance of the discovery had expanded dramatically since those first days of preliminary assessment. What had initially appeared to be an isolated ceremonial site had proven to be the central element of a much more extensive cultural complex. Ground-penetrating radar had revealed buried foundations extending across nearly 6 acres of Mia's property, structures that predated known ancestral Puebloan settlements in the region by at least 2 centuries. Most significant was the writing system itself, now officially designated the Cimarron script after the county where it was discovered. Its existence challenged fundamental assumptions about cultural development in the pre-Columbian Southwest, suggesting either an independent invention of writing or previously unknown connections to Mesoamerican cultural centers hundreds of miles to the south. Dr. Richard Blackburn, who had extended his initial visit into a 3-month residency at the site, joined them at the display. "The National Geographic team has arrived for their scheduled documentation session," he informed them. "They've agreed to all the access protocols established with the Tribal Consultation Committee." The media attention had been inevitable once word of the discovery spread beyond academic circles. After the initial uncontrolled rush of reporters that Mia had firmly turned away, a more structured approach to public information had been established. Selected journalists with archaeological experience were permitted controlled access to the site and findings, always with indigenous representatives present and strict guidelines about what could be photographed or reported. "I still find it surreal," Mia admitted as they walked toward the ranch house where the National Geographic team waited. "3 months ago, I was living in my truck and desperate enough to buy a collapsing ranch without utilities. Now I'm helping coordinate media access to what everyone keeps calling the most significant archaeological discovery in the Southwest in 50 years. Elena smiled at the understatement. "That's actually a conservative assessment. The Cimarron script represents the only known pre-Columbian writing system indigenous to what's now the United States. Its implications for understanding cultural development and knowledge transmission in North America are revolutionary." The transformation of Mia's circumstances had been as dramatic as the academic implications of her discovery. The formal agreement established with the university consortium had included substantial financial compensation for research access, funding for property improvements, and a specially created fellowship that allowed her to complete her BFA while actively participating in the documentation project. Her dilapidated ranch house, while still far from luxurious, now had functional electricity from a solar array, satellite internet connection, and basic plumbing, improvements that had been expedited as part of the site security and research infrastructure development. The irony of achieving stable housing through an archaeological discovery wasn't lost on her. What had begun as a desperate $500 gamble had resolved her immediate financial crisis through entirely unexpected means. More profound than the material improvements was the shift in her academic and professional trajectory. What had begun as a simple photography project for her BFA had evolved into a specialized role documenting the discovery through multiple visual modalities. Her work now appeared in academic journals, museum exhibitions, and educational materials, with her unique perspective as both the discoverer and a visual arts specialist, providing context that traditional archaeological photography often lacked. They approached the ranch house. They found the National Geographic team setting up equipment under the watchful eye of Josephine Begay, who had become a regular presence at the site as the official tribal liaison. The respectful inclusion of indigenous perspectives had been central to the research approach from the earliest stages, with traditional knowledge guiding interpretation alongside scientific analysis. Mia, the magazine's senior writer, a veteran, science journalist named David Katzner, greeted her with genuine respect rather than the patronizing tone some media representatives had initially adopted toward the student who got lucky. 3 months of working with world-class researchers had earned Mia a reputation for insightful observations that belied her youth and formal credentials. "We're hoping to focus on the cultural context today," Katzner explained as they discussed the planned documentation session. "The astronomical alignments and writing system are fascinating technically, but our readers connect more deeply with the human stories behind ancient sites. Who were these people? How did their understanding of the stars shape their society?" "That's precisely where traditional knowledge offers crucial context," Josephine interjected. "Our oral histories speak of ancestors who read the sky language to guide planting cycles and ceremonial timing. While we can't claim direct cultural continuity with the specific people who created this site, their astronomical knowledge parallels practices maintained in Pueblo traditions into the modern era. The integration of indigenous perspectives with academic research had created a collaborative model that was itself becoming noteworthy in archaeological circles." Rather than the historical pattern of excluding native communities from interpretation of their ancestral sites, the Cimarron project had established protocols that recognized indigenous cultural authority alongside scientific expertise. As the National Geographic team conducted interviews and captured footage of the stone circle under carefully negotiated conditions, Mia found herself reflecting on how dramatically her life had diverged from its expected path. The desperate housing solution had transformed into not just financial stability, but professional opportunity that specifically leveraged her photography training and artistic perspective. "Your photographs from that first evening were extraordinary," Katana commented during a break in filming. "They captured details that might have been missed in conventional archaeological documentation. Have you considered pursuing this type of specialized visual documentation professionally?" The question touched on conversations Mia had been having with both her art professors and the archaeological team. Her unique position straddling both worlds had created unexpected career possibilities at the intersection of visual arts and cultural heritage documentation, a specialized niche that aligned perfectly with her technical skills and multicultural background. "I've actually been accepted into a specialized master's program that the university is creating based partly on this project," she explained. "It combines advanced photographic techniques with archaeological documentation methods and cultural heritage considerations. They're calling it visual anthropology and heritage documentation." What she didn't mention was that the program had been specifically designed around her unique circumstances, with full funding and flexible scheduling that allowed her continued involvement with the Cimarron project. The university had recognized both her exceptional work and the unprecedented opportunity the discovery presented for developing new interdisciplinary approaches to cultural heritage documentation. As the day's documentation session concluded, Mia received a message from her parents, who were planning their first visit to the property the following weekend. Explaining the dramatic turn her life had taken had been challenging through phone calls and video chats. Her father, a practical man whose life had been defined by agricultural labor, had been particularly skeptical about archaeological discoveries translating into genuine opportunities. "My parents still think I made a reckless decision buying this place," she confided to Elena as they reviewed the day's schedule for the following morning. "I'm not sure they'll truly understand what's happened here until they see it firsthand. Many of our most significant discoveries come from decisions others might consider reckless," Elena responded thoughtfully. "Scientific breakthroughs rarely follow safe, predictable paths. Your willingness to take a chance on this property, combined with the observational skills to recognize the significance of what you found, is precisely what led to this extraordinary outcome." The validation from a senior academic who had become both mentor and collaborator meant more to Mia than the growing list of professional accolades her work was receiving. As a first-generation college student from an immigrant family, navigating academic institutions had always involved crossing invisible cultural boundaries. The discovery had accelerated that journey, placing her in direct collaboration with world-renowned experts in a relationship defined by mutual respect rather than hierarchical authority. Later that evening, after the National Geographic team and researchers had departed, Mia hiked alone to the stone circle, as she often did at sunset. The site had been carefully protected with unobtrusive barriers that prevented damage while maintaining the visual integrity of the landscape. Security cameras monitored the area continuously, but Mia had been granted unrestricted access as the property owner and project participant. The evening light cast the same dramatic shadows that had revealed the petroglyphs to her on that first exploratory hike 3 months earlier. Despite the extensive documentation and analysis that had occurred since then, She still felt a profound sense of wonder when witnessing how the setting sun brought specific symbols into sharp relief at precise seasonal alignments, just as the ancient creators had intended a millennium ago. She settled on a smooth boulder at the edge of the site, capturing the sunset illumination with her camera as she had dozens of times before. The systematic documentation of seasonal light changes across the stone circle had become part of her contribution to the research, a time-lapse record of astronomical alignments that connected ancient observations to contemporary understanding. As darkness fell and stars emerged above the desert landscape, Mia found herself contemplating the parallels between her journey and that of the ancient astronomers who had created this site. Both involved careful observation, persistence against challenging circumstances, and methods of recording knowledge for others to build upon. Her photographs, like their carved symbols, served as vehicles for transmitting observations across boundaries of time and understanding. The following morning brought the weekly research team meeting, where specialists from various disciplines shared updates on their respective aspects of the project. These sessions had evolved into Mia's most valuable educational experience, exposing her to advanced methodologies from fields ranging from archaeoastronomy to geochemical analysis to linguistic pattern recognition. The carbon dating results from the structural timbers are particularly significant, the lead archaeologist reported. The consistent dates ranging from 940 to 1020 CE place this settlement earlier than previously documented complex sites in the region. Combined with the writing system's sophistication, this suggests we're looking at a previously unrecognized cultural fluorescence that predates what we've traditionally considered the height of pre-Columbian development in the Southwest. The linguistic analysis continues to support our hypothesis about the writing system's independent development, added Dr. Blackburn. While certain organizational principles show distant parallels to Mesoamerican systems, the specific implementation appears entirely unique. This wasn't simply borrowed knowledge, it was innovative adaptation and original creation. Josephine provided updates from the ongoing consultation with tribal knowledge keepers. The oral traditions regarding star readers and their special writing continue to provide valuable interpretive context. Several elders have identified elements in the symbolic patterns that align with traditional cultural understandings of celestial relationships, particularly regarding the connection between specific star positions and ceremonial timing. As the meeting continued, Mia noticed a subtle but significant shift in how her observations were received. Where the early weeks of research had included occasional condescension toward her lack of formal archaeological training, her contributions were now actively solicited and seriously considered, particularly regarding visual patterns and spatial relationships that her photographer's eye recognized more readily than specialists focused on their narrow domains. After the meeting, Dr. Thompson approached her with news that highlighted just how dramatically her circumstances had changed. The Smithsonian is preparing a major exhibition on writing systems of the Americas, and they've requested your original photographs as central elements in the Cimarron script section. They're offering to acquire the complete documentation series for their permanent collection, with full attribution and substantial acquisition fees. The prospect of her work being preserved in the nation's premier cultural institution, the university has created a special graduate program for Mia based on her work here, Elena explained, deliberately emphasizing the institutional recognition. Her photographic documentation has established new standards for visual recording of archaeological sites. Several of her techniques are being adopted as protocols for similar projects elsewhere. Later, as they shared a meal at the small table in Mia's modest living space, her father asked the practical questions that reflected his lifetime of cautious financial management. "This is all very impressive, But how does it support you? These opportunities with famous museums and universities, do they provide for your future? Mia explained the financial arrangements that had transformed her circumstances, the substantial access fees that had already eliminated her student debt, the fellowship covering her graduate studies, the property improvements funded through research grants, and the developing professional opportunities with cultural institutions. What had begun as a desperate housing solution had resolved not just her immediate needs, but created long-term financial and professional stability. So this land that cost almost nothing is now worth something? Her father asked, the concept of property value being most comprehensible within his framework of financial security. The land itself hasn't changed much in value, Mia explained, but what's on it is considered priceless from a historical perspective. The agreements protect both the archaeological site and my ownership rights. I'll always have a home here if I want it, but I also have opportunities I never imagined before. That evening, as her parents settled into the guest room that had been created through targeted renovations, Mia joined Elena and Dr. Blackburn at the research facility to review preliminary findings that would be included in the first major academic publication about the site. The paper, scheduled for the journal Science with Mia, listed among the co-authors, represented another milestone in her unexpected academic journey. We've structured this initial publication to establish the fundamental significance of the site and writing system, Blackburn explained, while acknowledging that years of research will be required to fully understand their implications. The peer reviewers have been exceptionally positive. One called it potentially the most significant revision to our understanding of pre-Columbian cultural development in North America in the past 50 years. The following day brought the autumn equinox, a key astronomical alignment that the research team had been anticipating based on analysis of the stone circle's orientation. At precisely the calculated moment, sunlight passed between specific standing stones to illuminate the central carved surface in a pattern that highlighted particular symbols, a phenomenon that occurred only on the equinoxes and demonstrated the sophisticated astronomical knowledge of the site's creators. Mia's parents watched in quiet amazement as researchers documented the alignment with specialized equipment, while Josephine and other indigenous representatives conducted traditional observances at an appropriate distance. The convergence of cutting-edge scientific documentation and cultural ceremonial respect embodied the project's commitment to integrating multiple ways of understanding the site's significance. I think I understand now, her father said quietly as they observed the proceedings. This isn't just old rocks with drawings. This is history that changes how we understand the past. Exactly, Mia confirmed. The people who created this were astronomers and mathematicians and writers 1,000 years ago, in a place where experts didn't think that kind of knowledge existed. Everything in the textbooks about this region's history has to be reconsidered because of what's here. As her parents prepared to depart later that day, her mother embraced her with tears in her eyes. When you told us you were buying an abandoned ranch in the middle of nowhere with your last money, I thought you had made a terrible mistake. I should have had more faith in your judgment. I got lucky, Mama, Mia acknowledged honestly. I couldn't have known what was here, but I did trust my eyes when I saw something unusual, and I documented it carefully because that's what my professors taught me to do. That's not luck, her father interjected. That's being prepared to recognize opportunity. We didn't cross the border with nothing and build a life by luck. We observed, worked hard, and made the most of what opportunities came. You've done the same. The perspective resonated with Mia's own evolving understanding of her journey. While The initial discovery had involved an element of chance. Everything that followed had resulted from her trained observation skills, work ethic, and willingness to engage with complex academic and cultural considerations outside her formal training. After her parents departed, Mia joined the research team for an evening session reviewing the day's Equinox documentation. The data confirmed their hypotheses about the intentional astronomical alignments and provided additional insight into specific symbols that appeared to correlate with seasonal observations. We're seeing a level of mathematical precision that rivals any ancient astronomical site in the Americas, Dr. Thompson explained, displaying charts that showed the angular relationships between stone placements. These weren't approximate alignments. They were calculated with extraordinary accuracy, suggesting sophisticated understanding of celestial mechanics. As the meeting concluded, Elena mentioned an upcoming presentation at the annual Archaeological Institute of America conference, where the first comprehensive overview of the Cimarron project would be shared with the broader academic community. We've been invited to present in the plenary session, a recognition of this discovery's significance. The committee has specifically requested that Mia participate as one of the presenters, sharing her perspective as both the discoverer and visual documentation specialist. The invitation represented another step in Mia's integration into the professional archaeological community, not as a fortunate amateur who stumbled upon something significant, but as a valued contributor with specialized expertise. Her unique perspective bridging visual arts and cultural documentation had proven valuable enough to warrant inclusion in the field's most prestigious annual gathering. That night, alone in her modest living space within the gradually improving ranch house, Mia reviewed photographs from the day's Equinox observations alongside images from her very first visit to the stone circle 3 months earlier. The contrast was striking. Her initial documentation captured with basic equipment and intuitive composition versus the sophisticated multispectral imaging now employed by the research team. Yet despite the technical differences, her original photographs had captured essential elements that triggered recognition of the site's significance. Her artist's eye had recognized patterns that might have appeared merely random to others, and her photographic training had ensured proper documentation of details that proved crucial for preliminary assessment. The following week brought another significant development as the first academic paper on the Cimarron script was published in Science, generating international attention beyond archaeological circles. Major news outlets carried stories about the revolutionary discovery that rewrites understanding of ancient North American cultures, with particular emphasis on the existence of a true writing system where none had been thought to exist. Mia found herself navigating interview requests from media organizations ranging from scholarly publications to popular science magazines to major television networks. With guidance from the university's media relations team and support from Elena and Dr. Blackburn, she developed a clear narrative that emphasized both the archaeological significance and the collaborative research model that centered indigenous perspectives alongside academic expertise. The most meaningful aspect of this discovery isn't just what it tells us about the past, but how it's changing our approach to archaeological research in the present, she explained during one particularly thoughtful interview. The integration of traditional knowledge with scientific methodology creates a more complete understanding than either approach could achieve independently. 6 months after her initial discovery, Mia stood at the podium during the plenary session of the Archaeological Institute of America's annual conference, addressing hundreds of the field's leading experts. The journey from homeless student to featured presenter at archaeology's premier gathering had been extraordinary by any measure. yet she felt a surprising calm as she shared her unique perspective on the discovery and documentation process. Training as a photographer taught me to recognize patterns and relationships that might not be immediately obvious, she explained, displaying split-screen images that showed her original photographs alongside advanced technical documentation of the same features. Visual literacy, the ability to read landscapes and identify human modifications within natural settings, proved as valuable as technical expertise in identifying this site's significance. The response to her presentation was overwhelmingly positive, with particular praise for her insights regarding the integration of artistic perspective with archaeological documentation. Several university programs expressed interest in incorporating her developing methodologies into their field documentation protocols, while cultural heritage organizations inquired about potential collaboration on similar projects elsewhere. Following the conference, Mia returned to her property, now the center of an international research project that continued to yield new insights about pre-Columbian cultural development in North America. The ranch house had been gradually transformed through targeted improvements, though she had intentionally maintained its rustic character rather than replacing it entirely. The contrast between her modest living space and the sophisticated research facility remained a tangible reminder of her journey. 1 year after her discovery, Mia stood beside tribal representatives, university officials, and government agencies. Yet a formal ceremony, designating the site as a National Historic Landmark, the designation represented the highest level of federal recognition for historically significant properties, ensuring permanent protection while maintaining her ownership rights through specially crafted agreements. What began as one student's desperate search for affordable housing has transformed our understanding of cultural development in pre-Columbian North America, the National Park Service representative stated during the ceremony. The Cimarron script site demonstrates how significant historical knowledge can remain hidden in plain sight until someone with the right perspective recognizes patterns others have missed for generations. As the official plaques were unveiled, Mia reflected on the extraordinary convergence of circumstances that had led to this moment. Financial hardship compelling her to purchase an abandoned property, artistic training that enabled her to recognize significant patterns, academic connections that brought appropriate expertise to assess her discovery, and collaborative frameworks that respected both scientific and indigenous perspectives in interpreting its significance. The broke photography student, who had purchased a $500 ranch out of desperation, now owned a National Historic Landmark, had co-authored publications in the world's leading scientific journals, and was pursuing a specially created graduate program that merged her artistic background with cultural heritage documentation. The financial instability that had forced her to live in her truck had been replaced by grants, fellowships, and professional opportunities that provided long-term security. Yet beyond these personal transformations, Mia found deepest satisfaction in how the discovery had changed broader understanding of ancient knowledge systems in North America. The Cimarron script had demonstrated sophisticated mathematical, astronomical, and linguistic capabilities in a region where such developments had not been previously recognized, challenging Eurocentric assumptions about indigenous knowledge that had persisted even in academic contexts. That evening, following the designation ceremony, Mia hiked once more to the stone circle that had transformed her life. The setting sun cast the same shadows that had revealed the site's significance to her observant eye a year earlier, illuminating symbols carved by ancient hands to record celestial knowledge for future generations. The connection across a millennium felt tangible in that moment. her role as documenter, continuing a tradition of observation and recording that had begun with those who had arranged these stones in precise astronomical alignment. As stars emerged, in the clear desert sky, the same stars those ancient astronomers had mapped with remarkable precision, Mia contemplated how profoundly her desperate housing solution had altered not just her personal circumstances, but potentially our collective understanding of human cultural development in North America. The $500 property purchase, motivated by financial necessity, had revealed priceless historical knowledge, connecting her seemingly small decision to scholarly understandings with implications extending far beyond archaeology into how we conceptualize indigenous intellectual achievements across the continent. The young woman who had purchased a deserted ranch for $500 had discovered not just affordable housing, but a new understanding of our shared human past, all because she recognized patterns in stone that others had overlooked for centuries, proving once again that significant discoveries often come from unexpected sources, when trained observation meets opportunity in places others had dismissed as empty or worthless. Sometimes, it seems, the most valuable discoveries are made by those desperately searching for something else entirely. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.